Hello and welcome to the AFL High Performance Podcast. This is our coaches' monthly update where I'll discuss and present on AFL periodizations, strategies on how to maximize your in-season. Pre-seasons, obviously, where we put in the bulk of the work, but I firmly believe in seasons where we can really separate ourselves from world-class practitioners as we can make an impact to accelerating our most important players with their reconditioning program and bringing them back to availability to perform earlier, as well as making sure the group is ready to perform on the weekend. And then we've got adequate recovery processes in place, but we're also getting in enough stimulus to be able to maintain a good level of strength, power, speed, and conditioning across the whole season. So we're ready to go and perform at a really high level come finals time. So there's plenty that goes into it. I'll be discussing just the basics around AFL periodization, but you'll be able to apply this to community sport level, semi-pro level, different field sports. So there's lots of principles here that should apply no matter where you're working at in strength and conditioning, particularly in team sports. Firstly, why does it matter? So just to simplify periodization, can be a bit of a fancy buzzword, but essentially it's just what are we prioritizing in our program in this current phase, and you can look at that from a daily to a weekly, monthly, and a little bit longer over, obviously more of a macro yearly point of view. So probably if we start big picture, how do we want to play? What's the game model that the coaches want the players to be able to perform on the weekend? Are we going to be playing fast, attacking brand of footy? Are we going to be more contest-based, defensive style play? Are we going to be more skill acquisition, maintaining possession? So understanding really clearly on how the team's going to play. Then within that, what's our profile of our training squad? Where do our athletes sort of sit from a profile point of view, from conditioning, aerobic capacity, to speed, to our strength, to our power qualities? And then ultimately, what's in front of us? Where are we at? Are we coming off a Christmas break where the players have had 3 weeks off and you really don't know what they've done? Some have followed the program, some have done their own program, some have done not much at all. And they've been perhaps overseas or in an area that they have no access to any equipment. So there's lots of factors that can go into it, lots of constraints, a lot of things out of our control. But ultimately, if we're just keeping it a simple focus on it, periodization is what's important right now. Are we focusing on maximum performance for this weekend and making sure the players are ready to go and to play at the highest level? Or are we going through a bit of a training block where we want fatigue, we want muscle soreness DOMs, we want the players potentially even coming in feeling fatigued and working through that. And that's a bit of a reference point for later in the year, that even when you're feeling fatigued, you've got muscle soreness, you can still perform at a really high level. And it's really important that we stretch the group over preseason where they have those reference points that the coaches can lean on, as well as performance staff, whether it be an athlete returning from injury or from a training squad perspective. So just think of periodization as, what are we prioritizing? Why does it matter in AFL? It's one of the more complex and chaotic games. It's the longest duration game. So obviously from an endurance perspective, it's highly demanding, highly stressful, but it's also 360 degrees. So the nature of the agility and the contact aspect just means that there's a lot of strain and stress and a lot of awkward positions that the body's put under. Therefore, we want to make sure that we're understanding on what's required for that week to be able to allow the athletes to be robust and continue that robustness development, but also not go into the game fatigued. And there's a real sweet spot with that. You can definitely undershoot and be conservative, whether you call that a medical model or not. Essentially, it's just undershooting and focusing on allowing players to be available, but are they really at their peak for performance? And then you've got the performance model, and the extreme of that is you might be on a bit more of on the risk side of things. Perhaps you're exposing yourself to more load-related injuries naturally, especially with a squad of 45. Not everyone's going to be able to handle a demanding program with that trade-first mentality. So you can have different approaches, but we want to be thinking yearly. We want to be thinking more granular, And then in terms of monthly training blocks and what's our big focus from a physical point of view. But then also we want to still have the ability to be super agile with our individuals on that given day, and understand that players are going to achieve the best result from the program by being available. If we're pushing at the edge where they are injured and we're getting too many injuries, ultimately it doesn't matter what strength and power program, conditioning program you have. If they're not doing it and they're doing their own program because they're injured all the time, then clearly we're not going to be successful on game day. So that's just a bit of context in where we're going into it. So it's really important for performance, team performance, which is obviously what we're all working towards. It's really important for injuries and mitigating injuries. If you're a reconditioning coach, you're doing periodization every day for every individual that's in rehab. And it's something that's collaborative. We want the players on board, the teams on board, and the coaches. So everyone knows, is today a light day, more focused on perhaps skill acquisition and education, or is it a day where we're going, it's above game speed, it's above game intensity from our contact perspective, and we're going all in. So it's really important the whole club's on board on each training session so we know where we're working. If we break it down into, from an AFL perspective, pre-season, we've got our foundation period, which is pre-Christmas. Then we've got our transition period, which is the new year. And then the phase that we're in currently when we're working towards game fitness and looking at our training squad for round one. And then you've got obviously the home and away season, which is long. And then you've got your finals, which clearly we want to be in the best shape that we could possibly can be and most available come finals. Then you've got your final block, which is the off season, which is all about rejuvenation and mental and physical recovery. So from a pre-Christmas block, really simply, that's an area where we can be quite linear because we might only have 3 to 5 weeks. So with our strength and power program, you might test some of the boys week one, see where they're at with your training squad, with your compound lifts, and then from there build a bit of a linear program that continues on over the Christmas period, so that way we can retest in the new year, and you can see the progress the players have made. They've been really diligent when they're with you, but they've also maintained the program while they're over Christmas. And strength and power is a low-hanging fruit over the Christmas period because we know the training volumes are naturally down, so we can get some really good gains in that period. So from a foundation perspective, that's the big focus. What do we see as potential risks for each individual, whether it be calves, hamstrings, groins, putting in the work in that space, make sure we're developing chronic load. And it's also a time where the coaches naturally are putting in a lot of skill and tactical breakdown work to develop that foundational block. But from our microcycle point of view, linear periodization is where we can go. So literally every week we can get a little bit more out of them over those 3 to 4 weeks over pre-Christmas, where our training volume and intensity will go up on the field and in the gym, and then they effectively finish on their highest week pre-Christmas for that block. And then we know that they've got 2 to 3 weeks, depending on where you're at in league or in AFL, where you're naturally going to get a bit of a deload, and then we reload again in the new year. Our new year period is where we're thinking games. So we're working back from, okay, we know we're going to be playing some football in February against opposition. Yes, it's going to be high interchange because we're going to have deep squads, looking at a lot of the younger players, giving everyone opportunity and experimenting a little bit. Your senior players are probably getting a fair chop out because you know what you're going to get from them, just making sure that they're getting enough match conditioning that they need so they're ready to go for round one. But for the most part, we're looking at the rest of the squad because we know a deep squad is really important for the year. So that transition period is really key. Match load and also match play is going to be going up every week. So we want to make sure that the athletes are super robust and they understand how important the Christmas program is, both for the strength and mitigation work that they're doing, but also for their speed and agility and maintaining their kicking volumes and skills across the Christmas period. That transition period, naturally, it's going to be undulating. So we'll have our big days, but also our recovery days to be able to accommodate those bigger days, because we're getting more load in specificity, where the pre-Christmas is more foundational, where we can get some bigger sessions and be pretty consistent, just build week after week. Because we've got a longer block before we have a long break, there'll be some 4-day mini breaks in the new year, but essentially once you start back in the new year, you won't really get much longer than a 4-day break until end of September. Really important that we undulate our periodization. We have our low days, and we make them deliberately low, both in the gym and on the field, from a volume perspective. And we make sure that when we go big, it's our high intensity day. We get the drills right, make sure that the intensity is an absolute premium for those sessions. So high low is really important. From a condition point of view, we want to make sure we've got a finger on the pulse, whether you're doing wellness or not, just get an idea of how athletes are coping with the program. We're ramping up their match load exposures, so we know it's a risky period. They're doing their biggest volumes and intensities in that period of January, February, that they will for the whole year. So naturally, the risks are high for soft tissue and stress fractures. So we want to make sure that we're spending as much time around our athletes as we can to be able to make sound decisions, and we've got good monitoring processes in place, whether using the force decks, force frame, all the Volt equipment, as well as some subjective feedback or just simple communication and getting a read for your athletes and knowing your athletes at a really high level, and having a individualized approach that the coaches are on board with, where understanding that if we can get the whole squad through 90% of training, we'll take that. So if that means every now and then we need to give an athlete a chop out, and we're being proactive to prevent risk of injury, which is really hard because you never know the injuries you save. You only know the injuries that occur. But we're putting in sound processes in place, everyone's on board, both coaches, players, and medical performance staff, where we're pushing the boundaries, we're building robustness, but also when we're thinking that players are on the edge, we're giving them an individualized program that day. Doesn't mean they're not training. Doesn't mean that they're not doing work. They might do the same amount of volume GPS-wise, but a little bit might be in a controlled fashion with straight line running, for example. So they're still building their chronic loads, but you might just be reducing some of the risk of the football drills, for example. Moving into our in-season mode, it's really important that we're not going into that recovery cycle where the mindset is that pre-season is where you do your work, in-season is where you work hard on game day, and the rest is recovery. It's really important that we're putting in the work in the gym early in the week. So high intensity in the gym early in the week while we're still recovering, and then high intensity on the field later on the week as we're preparing for the game. So we want high max force, high power work early in the week. That's going to help with the recovery process, but it's also going to help with stimulating the body and making sure they're still moving the needle with their strength and power, because the volumes are down. So if you're covering 25K a week, you in preseason at times you're covering 40K a week. So they're significantly down in season. It's a great opportunity to make some strength and power progress for those athletes that need it. So we want to still have that mindset, still push. But then at the same time, we want to make sure that they're feeling really ready to perform on the weekend and not getting greedy and not focusing on maximizing gym performance at the sacrifice of team and individual football performance. Football performance is number one. And I did a recent monthly update on that for athletes as well as coaches. Just recently posted that on the podcast regarding the Strength and Power program, but I just thought I'd highlight that again. But yeah, we're working on that. Similar philosophy to the transition period of the in-season, where we're undulating due to the game day. So if you've got an 8-day break, naturally you're going to get a bit more training load in. If you've got a 9-day break, more training load in. If you've got a 5-day break or a 6-day break, it's your minimum effective dose. What do the athletes need on field, in the team meetings, duration-wise, in the gym, everything, to be able to get in what we need to prepare, but not stretch the athletes even more, because we know it can take a load on the athletes. Traveling, another thing that's a stressor for the athletes. So we've got to take all these factors into account, and that all comes in influencing what's our priority, and naturally our periodization. So we're agile, and we're using undulation periodization over the in-season model. Once we hit into finals, that's where we're starting to strip back the volume naturally. Every game is so important. So we want high intensity. So we're priming the nervous system, and the athletes feel like they're still putting in the work. but take a little bit of volume off them, and that will, if you've done it well in season, that will have a profound effect on their energy come game day, because they will be jumping out of their skin because they're so used to doing a good amount of work. Their work capacity is built up, and then you've suddenly just dropped that back a little bit, still kept the intensity up. So we're still, recruiting good amount of muscle mass. We're still working through our rate of force development in the gym. We're still doing reactive agility, sprint work on the field. They're doing high intensity football work. So you're still priming them for game day and still getting in quality work, but you're just naturally just taking off a little bit of volume, whether it be 10, 15%. And that's where we move into, if you win your first final in your top four, you got a week off, we can put in some great training and get a good quality training block in. Whereas if you're week to week, every game's grand final week, you're all about maximizing that game so you can extend your finals. So it's all about what do we really need in the gym for this coming week, knowing that if we lose, the adaptation is worthless. So really, you want to make sure that you're just focusing on winning that game, with the big picture in mind that you could be playing again in 4 weeks' time. So that's where we're not like dropping all the mitigation work out, because they've built up a tolerance of that work. You might be something that you used to do 4 sets of 3 might now be 3 sets of 3, for an example. So it doesn't need to be significant, but it's just a little bit by little bit. The coach is doing it with the team meetings. Everything's more precise. The training volume's just slightly down. From a duration perspective, everything's just flows really well. And in the gym, you're taking off a little bit of sets here or there, or perhaps rep ranges. So it just feels like a slight sharpen up for the athletes. That's our in-season mode. So we're highly agile. Then we're moving into our off-season mode. Give the players 2 weeks off, no program. Every program will have a slightly different philosophy. Some won't give a program at all, understanding that the athletes know what they're doing, a mature group, and they're going to have their own programs that they're going to follow regardless. And if they need a program, they want a program, to reach out. Majority of programs will give them 2 weeks off running, and then they'll go into a 2 total body session and 2 run for 2 weeks. So it's pretty light for a month for them, relative. And then they'll build towards 3 runs a week and 3 total body sessions for the remaining of the off season. So it's a great opportunity to get away, spend time with loved ones, and just focus on other areas of your life, bit of work-life balance, while still getting in some quality work. From a strength and conditioning point of view, really important for those that are at risk of injury, they still have some targeted work. So if you know they've got some tendon issues, maybe some eccentrics, extra eccentrics are in there. If they've got, and of course they're maintaining their just normal routine with pre-field and top-up work in the gym. If they're at risk of whether it be quad or adductor work, just reiterating how important the kicking and the speed work, obviously from hamstrings, and the change of direction work is. So actually setting up your drills and doing and catching up with teammates and doing football in the off season. So for some of you, you may just be a trail runner over the off season, and you thoroughly enjoy that. But if you've had injuries in the pre-Christmas block, like groins, like quads or hamstrings, it's probably because you haven't sprinted over pre-Christmas, you haven't been doing enough change of direction, and you haven't been keeping up your kicking. So if that is you, make sure you use the off-season period to maintain some football exposures, because all football programs are going to want to be not building you up, but actually hit the ground running with a proper program. So that's happening at not just AFL level, but semi-pro level and even community high-level programs now. So hopefully that just gives a good little snapshot. Key training loads that we want to take into account. So volume, clearly the easiest thing to look at is our total distance as well as our high speed running. If you haven't got that, you can look at the player's subjective rate of perceived exertion and just times that by the duration of the session, and do that for every session. You can start to get a bit of an idea of their training load and build your planning around that. And there's research on that, and that is quite a reliable process to go through. From an intensity point of view, we can look at a work rate, both in volume as well as high speed running, and look to get some overspeed in our football drills. So if you've got GPS, you can look at what does a typical midfielder do per minute of a game, and then make sure that we're coming up with some drills that are above that 10, 20%. So they're getting some quality training in, some overspeed training in. If you haven't got GPS, then it's just going to have to be the coach's eye and the performance staff eye on intensity, as well as leaders as well, and just watching the drills and using your instinct and common sense to work out whether you're training at above game intensity over your preseason and in season on your main training session. As I mentioned with the schedule, you're going to have your constraints no matter what level you're on. So we want to understand those schedule and those operational constraints. How does that influence our programming? Things like bye games. Are we using it as time to freshen up and time away from the club, or are we using it as time to get some extra training work in to set ourselves up for maintaining our chronic load exposure, but also another opportunity to make change from a football perspective. And then, of course, game day regarding the days break in between week to week and travel. Common pre and in-season mistakes. The program is too rigid, both in the gym and with the conditioning. And strength and conditioning coaches are more prioritizing your 2K time trial and fitness tests or your max 1RM, and you're not thinking about what's most important, which is their football and their availability. So we want to push those things are important, but we don't want to sacrifice peak performance on those tests for the detriment to the player. So making sure that team performance is always and an individualized approach is always at our forefront. In season, like I mentioned before, too heavily focused on the recovery program. Recovery should be up until the 3 days post game day, and then the athlete should be recovered. Now we're focusing on performance. So if you've got a 7-day break, the first half of it, 3 days, is heavily recovery focused. The next 4 days leading up to game day, or 3 days leading up to game day, should be heavily performance focused. And that's going to be different for each individual. But everyone's going to need some form of intensity in their training, and the team's going to need that intensity to get up for the next game. So we don't want to fall into that trap of just focusing on recovery. Another mistake that commonly happens all the time is a one size fits all. We've got different types of athletes within our squad. We need to make sure we adhere to that. If you don't, you're just leading yourself to a risk of higher injuries. But not just that, your team's not going to be all on the same page come game day. Some are going to be fatigued, some are going to be feeling really fresh. So everyone's different, whether you're a fast twitch, more based athlete, and for you intensity is key, and making sure you're quite sensitive to volume, and others that are workhorses, they need to get in a bit of work. They need to feel like they've worked up a sweat the day before a game, or even leading into their game day warm-up, and they feel like they're putting in the work. Their work ethic is so critical to their performance, and that's as much mental as it is physical. So know your athletes and make sure you've got an environment that allows them to thrive. And then the last one, not collaborative with the coaches and the medical. So strength and conditioning coaches, we want to make sure as the medical staff, as the coaches, we're all on the same page. Is the upcoming game an absolute critical one? Is it a rivalry? We know their recovery, because it's going to be a combative game. It's going to be a physical game, and it's going to be tight. We know that their recovery post that is going to be super demanding for the upcoming game, and perhaps there's a huge arousal levels up to that rival game, and we know that there's a bit of a drop off and a trend where there's a poor performance the following week. So we want to build out a fortnightly block on how do we prepare for the upcoming game, but also how do we maximize our recovery and our preparation for the following game to be able to reset no matter the result of that rivalry game, to prepare for the following game. So all these little things come into account, but collaboration is the key. Each perspective, from your rookie through to your leader, from the playing squad through to coaches, through to medical staff, they're all going to have their own lens and bit of a sense of what's going on. So we want to make sure we're across all that so we can make some sound decisions as a club. Top 3 must-haves. You need to be tracking load. We don't want to be going any more than 10 to 15% on a weekly basis with our training load exposures with your key metrics. So whether you're using high-speed running, sprint distance, accel, decels, whatever it might be that you hang your hat on that's important to your game model. We don't want to be having bigger spikes than 15% per week. So have some form of way of tracking load. Typically, we want to deload every 4 to 6 weeks. Most of the time, the schedule is going to allow for that anyway, whether it be a 4-day mini break for AFL players or the Christmas period. So preseason is almost taken care of from a constraints point of view. But in season, we do have our buys, but that's going to be different for everyone. So some might not have a buy for 8 weeks. So how are you going to look to put in a little mini deload in there at the 5-week mark to ensure that you don't drop off a cliff round 7, round 8? Another one that's really important is keep the main thing the main thing. So if we're in preseason, we're building our foundational block, we're building work capacity, and we're allowing the athletes to build the physical qualities they need to perform their role at a really high level. When we're in season, we're definitely still pushing the needle with their physical work, but there's some other areas that we're prioritizing, and we want to make sure that the athletes are getting really good quality football training in during the week, and then they're not having any DOMs or anything that's going to affect their individuals. Some individuals like having DOMs on game day, but the majority of them won't. So we want to make sure that we're getting our prescription right in the week for each individual to ensure that they feel ready to perform on a high level. And we're making sure that we're doing our part for that aspect of the role. So keep the main thing. Don't get too caught up into getting too fancy or trying experimenting too much in season. Yes, we do want to mix things up and we do want to shake up the monotony of things, but that could just simply mean training off site or just changing a drill. So it's the same, but different, with some creativity and using people in the organization to be able to still get the stimulus you're looking for, but just in a slightly different way. Hopefully there's some good tips there on AFL periodization. Like I said, I did a masterclass with this recently with Liam Purcell, who's got a new business he's just launched for strength and conditioning coaches, sports scientists. So if you want a more in-depth presentation on this, this is just some of the highlights. Then I did a presentation for an hour for Liam, which is on his membership site. So you can go check that out. Thank you for everyone that's tuned into this episode. If you've got any recommendations on future topics that you'd like me to present on, feel free to reach out on Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you are on socials, or you can email me at jackpro.com. And of course, if you want more in-depth presentations, including spreadsheets that I use from a strength and power conditioning, high performance manager or reconditioning role, make sure to join our academy. It's only $40 a month and you can cancel anytime by going over to preparelikeaproacademy.com.au. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I will see you on the next episode.